Well, this is how hunters themselves become the prey. Or you could also call it a hunt for traitors. Thousands of federal agency employees got caught in the net. Sponsors of local terrorists have been identified. All of this together, it's all tangled up in what's happening in America right now. Remember, as Vysotsky said, the hunt for wolves is on, the hunt is on. Well, now I'll show you now our incomparable Glenn Beck and his famous chart. He's always drawing charts, showing graphs on the board, drawing diagrams with chalk. He began 30 years ago, but how? As a disc jockey, well, with a music radio program, actually a small radio station, which suddenly, out of nowhere, millions of people started listening to. Not even because of the music, because honestly, everyone was playing pretty much the same thing, but because everyone was interested. He would tell stories, some jokes, some anecdotes, comment on something, and suddenly throw in something political. Glenn was noticed, then brought over to Fox, and for many years, every time he was on screen, 3 million loyal viewers watched him every day. And of course, on especially big days, it was much more.
Let me show you some achievements, some good things that are happening. After years of political violence, the Trump administration recognized Antifa as a domestic terrorist organization. And I want to show you specifically some of the wording used in this definition. It is claimed that this is a militaristic anarchist enterprise. It uses illegal means to organize and carry out a campaign of violence. This campaign includes coordinated efforts. They recruit, train, and radicalize young Americans using advanced methods to hide funding and operations. Now, I want to draw attention to this because you've never heard Antifa described this way, at least not by Democrats or anyone in the mainstream media or liberal think tanks.
They tried to present Antifa to us. Well, these guys were burning, killing, hitting female students on the head with pipes, storming businesses and universities. And they tried to tell us that these were just a few scattered groups of poor, like students. Or just nice, liberal, progressive kids just a bit older than teenagers. That's what they told us.
That's what you're used to seeing. Antifa is a decentralized political movement without civilization, without central leadership. Show me another example here. We are Antifa. Antifa is a decentralized, leaderless movement. How about this? A broad and decentralized political movement. Okay, so it's decentralized and leaderless. You got it. That's good. They hammer these words into our heads over and over again. And it's in every source. Why are they doing this? Well, it's pretty obvious. And this last source unintentionally describes the reason for the deception. While describing Antifa's methods, they call them, quote, extraordinary, radical, and in some cases, violent and illegal means. That's it. It has to be decentralized, it has to be a lone actor, it has to be leaderless. Because politicians, police, activists, and all other accomplices know that if violent and illegal actions take place, anyone caught helping to organize and finance them should go to jail. And none of these people want to go to jail. They'll use all these crazies, but they don't want to end up in jail themselves. So they are a decentralized and leaderless organization.
Let me explain. If it's an organized structure with leaders, discipline, funding, and training, then if this organization burns, breaks, injures, or God forbid kills someone, those who support it will be prosecuted for aiding and abetting. Therefore, we are being lied to.
A decentralized movement that holds training conferences in cities like Philadelphia, but they don't have a clear leader or organization. Like, who is planning this? Universities like City University of New York in New York, they have entire courses on global Antifa. It's a 14-week course on far-left revolutionary activism at a college located right in the financial center of the world. But it shows no signs of a leader, no organization. That's nonsense, and everyone knows it.
Of course, everyone knows that. But while the power in the law enforcement and human rights agencies was held by the Democrats, By human rights, I mean the police and so on the guard. That is, those who actually organized and financed Antifa. We weren't getting the truth from them. An interesting coincidence. The 5th Directorate of the KGB of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics was headed for many years by General Philipp Denisovich Bobkov. He was the second to last head. After that, he moved to another organization. I'll talk about that in a second as well. He came up with the idea and developed the merging of the KGB and organized crime. So they were already working at a time when we still thought the Soviet Union was strong, and we were all singing songs about how no one could ever defeat us. They were already working on what would happen after the collapse of the Soviet Union. So it was his idea to merge the KGB and organized crime, first tested in St. Petersburg by Lieutenant Colonel Putin. The idea was that the visible part of events in society would be controlled by the security forces. Well, in this case, the KGB plus someone else. And all the matters that needed to be handled, let's say, without coming to the surface, eliminating competitors, collecting bribes, controlling the flow of drugs, prostitution, and so on and so on. For example, casinos had large amounts of money circulating, so they would do it under the supervision of the KGB, but these were structures of the shadow world. For example, that's how the seaport in St. Petersburg was taken over, where it was owned by about 3 people. And Sobchak, Putin, and the St. Petersburg KGB director, I forgot his last name, though I knew him. But in fact, it was Kumarin, or rather Kumarin's gang, who actually ran things there. And later Putin had him rot in prison. And back in the days when I used to visit Petersburg, it was around 1990, I don't even remember exactly which year. So he was called the Night Director. By the way, most likely the KGB voted for Putin precisely because the experiment of combining the underground and above-ground worlds in Petersburg was so successful. Boykov, for his merits, or rather, so to speak, well, his so-called merits. Or maybe he just got too old to perform the duties he used to carry out in the 5th Directorate. So he moved to Gusinsky's Most, if you remember, and took a formal position there as head of security in that company. But in reality, he was overseeing the KGB's share in the holding, which was much larger than Gusinsky's share. Naturally, in the United States, by the way, they did the same thing, but the Praetorians in Rome did it too, and the Oprichniks there in Moscow, in Russia, and many others as well. So, hired and trained scum were shaping society on assignment. In this case, for us, the Democratic Party, that dirty work, which let's say our dear Komsomol fascists didn't want to do for obvious reasons, or didn't want to be exposed doing, was being done.
Glenn Beck. So let's just think about this for a minute. Let's call this a starting point for people in the FBI or the Department of Justice when they begin to investigate leads. For too long, people who may support Antifa have stayed in the shadows. That's what Trump is going to put an end to. Antifa is more than just a decentralized and leaderless organization. So I divided Antifa into 3 different categories: street groups and soldiers. That's one. Support groups and sources of funding. But let me start right with the street groups and soldiers, because this is exactly where politicians, the media, and think tanks say, this is the investigation. You can just investigate these guys. Yeah, that's it. Don't look here. But the groups have been constantly appearing in the news since around 2016. Groups like Rose City, Antifa Portland, Elm Fork, John Brown Gun Club, Antifa Oregon, Atlanta, Pittsburgh Antifa, Refuse Fascism, Jane's Revenge. Now, you've seen the destruction these groups leave everywhere. We keep seeing this every day in places like Chicago and Portland, but here we have to stop looking. Hey, they can't find anything because the trail goes cold. Here, Antifa is decentralized and leaderless. But if that's true, these are guys who don't work. Many of them are on drugs. They're crazy. They fund all of this themselves. Because how? We're moving on to the next category, namely the support groups. Hey, National Law Guild lawyers, that's the legal wing of Antifa. If you've been at a riot or seen something on television, you look to the side. There are people standing there in green hats. Yes, that's the National Lawyers Guild. They openly brag about how they provide legal support to the street soldiers. Yeah, but that's disorganized. There's no natural language generation. Next, we have Antifa International. It's pretty funny because the people who describe this call Antifa decentralized and leaderless. You have Antifa International. I mean, it's like Black Lives Matter Incorporated, but for Antifa fundraising. And again, who are you writing the check to? They are described as, quote, an international anti-fascist collective with years of management experience by the International Anti-Fascist Defense Fund and other anti-fascist projects. So you don't have a central administration, an operations base, or anything like that, but you have years of management experience. Is that true? What about Antifa International? Antifa International helped raise funds for the legal defense of militants who attacked the Immigration and Customs Enforcement facility in Texas. And while we're at it, take a look at Community Justice Exchange and their national bail funding network. They were bailing people out during the summer rage of the George Floyd protests. They're probably worth paying attention to, especially because of their major partner who, oh God, the Tides Foundation, our old friends from the Tides Foundation. Look at these connections. These organizations are numerous. We are legion. Yeah, that's probably what they're saying. Anyway, remember, as all politicians and media experts say, there's no centralized organization.
There's a single method in all United States and foreign cities. The clothing is nearly identical, and lawyers are notified and arrive in attire familiar to troublemakers for easy identification, approach, and requests for help or questions. Someone collects money for them, someone invests it somewhere. All the troublemakers don't work, but they have money to live there, for drugs and so on and so forth. Because, so to speak, the main question is money. Yeah, so where does the cash come from? Where do they get the money from? And the question immediately demands an answer from Verblud.
Guilders, funding sources. Interesting. Who should I make the check out to? It's divided between nonprofit organizations and foundations, as well as crowdfunding sources. Now, I've already mentioned the Tides Foundation, one of the darkest, most left-wing radical money channels on the planet. Do you know who knows all the ways that lead back to Tides? But first, let's take a look at this. The Tides Foundation funds an organization called the Alliance for Global Justice. Post's money comes from here. They redirect funds to groups like Refuse Fascism. They also gave the National Lawyers Guild more than $1 million just from 2018 to 2019. Are you going to write $1 million check to a leaderless group with no organization at all and just say, yeah, you guys know what to do with it? Who knows what to do with it? That's how the money trail of the radical left works. It's designed to be wrong. It's designed to confuse and disappear. All the connections exist, so why haven't we acted yet? Okay, moving on. Who else besides George Soros's creepy guys? The Open Society Foundation, they also fund the Alliance for Global Justice, and they're also connected to Antifa support groups. There are numerous sources of charitable funding just for this. Then you have Fidelity Investments, where you put your money. The Fidelity Investments Charitable Fund donates to the National Lawyers Guild. Also, the Schwab Charitable Foundation. Oh, if I had money in Schwab or Fidelity, I don't know if I would have it. They give to people who support these people. I mean, I could go on and on. We haven't even discussed crowdfunding platforms yet. You have ActBlue and Patreon. You have Fundraiser, the Action Network. Then you have book sales. Well, yeah, book sales. Like the college professor who released a book as an Antifa guide. Look, I'm not blaming anyone here. I'm just saying. That's pretty much the first thing that came to my mind. I'm just pointing out the connections that have a really strong smell to them. And I've been watching these people long enough to know that's how it works.
Let's get back to the mass layoffs of government officials. Strangely enough, it's all connected. So the liberal fascists are completely freaking out. They're starting to realize what kind of fools they've made of themselves. So now they're already saying, what kind of Schumer have we made?
Trump's man says, there's a significant bloodbath happening right now in the federal workforce. Hey, that's such a great meme. Roosevelt says, "The time has come, baby. Donald Trump's man for the federal workforce has announced that the bloodbath has already begun." Roosevelt says layoffs have started. A source from the Office of Management and Budget called the cuts significant but didn't confirm the number of layoffs. Now we know it's nearly 5,000. Trump said that Republicans are threatening with a vote, and the ultra-conservative architect of Project 2025 is trying to force the Democrats to come to the negotiating table. The government has been shut down since October 1, and both Democrats and Republicans are prepared to fight.
These federal workers are the laziest, sloppiest, most disgraceful, least productive, least impressive people I have ever seen in my life.
Obviously, there are people who do a good job. All right, I'm not saying we should fire everyone and just get rid of everything. The federal government is in complete chaos. Although, sometimes a guy can dream. I'm saying that's you, but how? The federal workforce is, the federal government is the #1 employer in all of America. It was never meant to be that way. Amazon and Walmart each have 1 million workers, while the federal government employs nearly 5 million people. And by the way, they get paid much more than a private sector worker.
During the Democrats' rule, bureaucrats started getting paid much more than similar specialists in the private sector. Plus, they have benefits, which is absolutely wrong. Plus, they have amazing pension conditions. We who work in the manufacturing sector are the ones paying for this. And the so-called benefits are more than even a small business owner can afford, not to mention what he can provide for his employees. And for United States officials, life has become better financially and in other ways than for any other group of the population.
Well, sometimes you have to do things you don't want to, and that's because the Democrats put us in this position. If the Democrats hadn't voted to shut down the government, we wouldn't be standing here talking about cuts. Today, we would be talking about all the other news happening in the world and in our country. We would discuss the great things this administration is doing to improve Americans' lives nationwide. But unfortunately, the Vice President of the United States and I have to come out here to talk about the government shutdown that the Democrats have put us in.
Of course, I feel sorry for the people who suddenly lost their source of income. But in the United States, many new businesses are starting construction and beginning operations. I'm saying that right now, Trump has brought in investments both from outside the country and from within the country. Our corporations are investing, and significant funds are also coming from foreign countries and companies. Why? Because we're experiencing a boom in an entirely new industry. It's like a new revolution. The first revolution was the so-called Industrial Revolution, which began roughly after Isaac Newton formulated some of his principles, from which it became clear that everything in the world operates according to the same laws. And after the Industrial Revolution, we had, well, let's say the computer revolution, right? Then the internet revolution, so to speak. And now we're going through the artificial intelligence revolution, which seems like it's going to make just as shocking an impression on everyone as the Industrial Revolution did. That is, it will overshadow things like the building of railroads, computers, and everything else. So, because this is happening, a huge number of jobs are starting to appear where people are needed who can be trained in something. So those who are laid off? Now, so to speak, they have a great opportunity to start doing something useful in their lives. Maybe move to a new state or city, just like their parents and grandparents did.
Ladies and gentlemen, right now, the Democrats are completely losing their composure because President Trump has just fulfilled his promise to start reducing the size of the federal government. As you all know, we are now on the 11th day of the federal government shutdown, a shutdown completely orchestrated by Chuck Schumer and the Democrats. And now President Trump has decided to let them try their own medicine. And what does that really mean? It means the following. Late last night, the Trump administration officially fired more than 4,000 unnecessary and redundant federal employees, ultimately exposing the Democratic blockade as not only a catastrophic mistake on their part, but also as an opportunity to truly drain the swamp. So friends, to really start today's report, take a look at this.
Roosevelt, the head of Office of Management and Budget, posted this a few minutes ago. This is a very direct and to the point tweet on X. He said, and if you guys can show it, the cuts have started. This means staff reductions. This is what Roosevelt came to talk to President Trump about in the Oval Office. Last week, when the government shutdown began, they were trying to figure out which agencies they could temporarily or permanently suspend or close. And a big part of that is laying off federal workers. A source from the Office of Management and Budget tells us right now that not only have the layoffs begun, but they are significant. During the Friday afternoon shutdown, many people were affected. According to the White House, are receiving notifications from their human resources managers or by email that their services are no longer needed by the federal government. What is this
mean? In every department of every agency, they had to determine which employees the department could do its work without. If it turns out that department heads were guided by favoritism and not reality, then the department heads will be fired. Trump wants to fire, as he said, 35–40% of all officials, depending on how you count, but for office workers, we have 2 million federally across the country. In addition to that, there are others. There's also the police and the army who are also on the federal budget. But we're talking specifically about officials who just sit around. 35% of these officials, maybe not all at once, by the way, but in parts and waves, depending on whether the reduced staff will or will not lead to improved performance. One more detail. In Washington, 95% of federal employees vote for the Democrats. That is, by firing tens and hundreds of thousands of Washington bureaucrats, it means cleaning out the apparatus not only of slackers, but also of those who demanded stealing more and more from our producers, from you and me, and giving it to them. It's time for them and their families to move into the production sector.
But of course, as expected, Senator Chuck Schumer, the organizer of this whole shutdown, is now absolutely losing his mind. In fact, look at what he said last night. In response to all these layoffs, Russell Vought just fired thousands of Americans with a tweet. Let's be honest, no one is forcing Trump or Vought to do this. They don't have to do it. They want to. They are heartlessly choosing to hurt people. Workers who protect our country, inspect our food, respond to natural disasters. This is deliberate chaos.
So when it doesn't work out, shout that you're not the thief. It's someone else who actually stopped you from stealing. Not approving the budget and shutting down the government. Is that a favorite trick or a trump card of a democratic revolution? I'm planning.
In fact, as Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson just emphasized yesterday afternoon, at this point, the Democrats have collectively voted 8 times to shut down the federal government. So without a doubt, this shutdown rests entirely on the shoulders of the Democrats, which means that as a result of this shutdown, President Trump can start massively firing Democratic saboteurs within the federal government. That's exactly what he's doing right now. Well, and
The obedient Democratic parties, the mass media. What about them? How about them? Will they at least say a word of truth, or is it the usual, I don't hear, I don't see, and I lie?
We found out which agencies here this Friday afternoon are now sending layoff notices, essentially firing their employees. And I just heard from a representative of the Department of Health and Human Services that they are among those agencies, those departments that are going to move forward with the layoffs. I was told that this will affect several divisions and that under the Biden administration, the department has become bloated. That's what the representative said. That is,
They hired unnecessary people to show that under Biden there is no unemployment. They hired people and paid them with our money. And extra people, they actually get in the way. Not only do they not make things better, they actually make things worse. They get underfoot, and when there are too many people, things get worse.
President Trump really does have the green light to kick these people out for good. Actually, on that note, look at this. And how many
permanent jobs? Do you want me to? Well, I can tell you, I'll be able to tell you that in 4 or 5 days if it keeps going. If it keeps going, it will be significant. And many of those jobs will never come back. But you'll actually have a much more balanced budget.
So, ladies and gentlemen, this raises a very interesting question. How much money have we wasted on all these completely unnecessary federal employees?
I've already calculated. If Trump fires 35% well, as reported, yes, that's 800,000 officials, and that's approximately $160 billion a year that we would save.
While we're talking about radically getting rid of all these progressive deep state swamp creatures, listen to what President Trump himself said about this yesterday afternoon. How many firings did you approve for this first phase and from which agencies?
Well, it's going to be a lot, and it's going to be focused on Democrats, because we believe, they started this, so it should be focused on Democrats. We'll announce the numbers soon, but it's going to be a lot of people, and it's all because of the Democrats. They want to give $1.5 trillion to people who entered the country illegally. More important than that, because we all have big hearts, we want people to be taken care of, but, we have 0 people coming in. That's Clint, right? That's a pretty impressive number even for a successful governor, but in the last 4 months, we haven't had a single person come in illegally. They arrive, but legally? Yes, they go through a process that's actually really good now, because we want people to come, but they have to come legally. We
Want immigration, but the kind that we can check and allow to live in our home. Personally, well, I absolutely don't need a Colombian killer, a rapist from Ghana, or a Red Khmer from, say, Lebanon, Egypt, or Iraq. I don't care where they're from. I do care. I care who will live next to me and send their children to the schools where my grandchildren study.
Now, I have to say, it has been widely documented to what extreme degree radical progressives within the federal judicial system have tried to undermine President Trump at every step. We've discussed this situation repeatedly. Nevertheless, a lesser-known fact is that we also had thousands of radical progressive activists within the federal government who similarly did everything they could to undermine the America First agenda. And so, in fact, thanks to the ongoing government shutdown, it was these people that President Trump had only just begun to get rid of.
That's why the left liberal, let's say liberal fascist press is shouting, this is political persecution. Earlier this month, 5 senior FBI officials were fired by Director Kashem Patel without explanation. Now, several sources tell Columbia Broadcasting System News that they may have been fired for political reasons.
An interesting form. The sources aren't named, several of them told us, so, well, if there are several unnamed sources, then it's definitely true, 100%. Well, they say it might be. So even the unnamed sources aren't saying anything for sure, they all just say it might be. These people were fired for political reasons, supposedly because they're anti-Trump.
The agents who were fired included Brian Driscoll. He briefly served as acting director of the Bureau at the beginning of President Trump's second term. Neither Driscoll nor any of the other agencies or agents who were fired had reached retirement age, so that means none of them will be able to receive full pensions. Columbia Broadcasting System News investigative reporter Daniel Kleidman is following this story and joins us to talk about it. Which cases were these officials handling when they were dismissed?
But at the time of their dismissal, they were working on a wide variety of cases. We don't know for sure what exactly was important about what they were working on before, and that's almost certainly the reason for their dismissal. They were working on cases related to President Trump, various criminal cases involving President Trump, his attempts to overturn the 2020 election, for example, and other similar cases. FBI
Commented,
they didn't do it. They didn't say anything.
We don't know how many employees have already been fired in total. If it's 105 of them are the ones who worked on Trump's cases, then what's the problem? But it turned out to be 5 people. If it's only 5 specifically, then it's interesting to know why they didn't inform Congress or directly to the Inspector General of the Department of Justice. They have direct access to the Inspector General of the Department of Justice, absolutely, if something illegal is happening. Why didn't they come forward? Why didn't they, let's say, even distance themselves from obviously false cases? Here's how I know they're false. I'll explain to you right now. The Supreme Court and several appellate courts overturned these cases, saying they were illegal. That's why I know they're illegal.
I know they don't deal with personnel matters. Most people know Donald Trump sometimes tweets when he fires people and why he does it.
The host asked the FBI if they explained anything. The answer is no. They said they don't give interviews or comments on personnel matters, which is true, right? But the journalist suddenly added that this isn't true, meaning it's not true that they don't give them, so they lied to him. Because Donald Trump writes and often says, "Wait a second, is Donald J. Trump serving in the FBI?" It's the FBI that doesn't give answers and doesn't comment, but they drag Trump into it to create the impression that it's only in this case they don't answer. And usually, so they also lied, usually they do answer. That's a typically left liberal response for you.
Today, FBI field agents connected to the January 6 investigations or the case of Donald Trump storing secret documents at Mar-a-Lago filed 2 lawsuits against Trump's Department of Justice. One of them accuses the Department of Justice of trying to identify agents and other FBI employees for dismissal as a form of politically motivated retaliation. The other asks the court for protection from the expected retaliatory decision by the Department of Justice to disclose their personal information for the purposes of condemnation and retribution. The agents fear vigilante actions from those they investigated. In the January 6 case, the agents are seeking protection from possible violence by the very people they investigated. Regarding the January 6 insurrection, many participants were violent and imprisoned, but all were pardoned by Trump and are now free.
They're fooling us again. People were first illegally put in prison for years, by the way, ruining many lives. And now when they demand punishment for those who forged documents, destroyed evidence, and put them in prison, they suddenly turned into prisoners whom Trump released, implying that they were guilty. But their associate Trump let them go, these criminals, simply because they are his people.
They claim the records have existed since the presidential pardons or commutations. January 6 riot leaders and others tagged FBI agents investigating them on social media, and agents learned some of their personal info had been posted by January 6 convicts on the darknet. Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, a Democrat from Rhode Island, is a member of the Judiciary Committee that oversees the Department of Justice, and he joins me now. First, Senator, do you think these people have a case here?
Obviously, there is. I think if we start with the statement that the new big lie is that Donald Trump is not a criminal, he wasn't convicted on fraud charges. He didn't escape criminal liability for his attempts to interfere in the federal election, thanks to the Supreme Court, which granted him a completely new kind of immunity. Once you've started this lie, you need to have an explanation
why
these
cases
had
place.
That's brilliant. Trump is a criminal, and if the Supreme Court hadn't acquitted him, he would be in prison. Don't you find anything strange about this statement? Actually, the United States should. There's a principle called the presumption of innocence, and until a court convicts you, you are innocent. But for them, Trump is guilty. But it's like Nenarukam acquitted him and cleared him of charges in the United States Supreme Court, but he's still guilty and would be in jail if it weren't for the United States Supreme Court. So the hunters became the prey. Those who thought they were untouchable, well, New York Attorney General Letitia James, California Senator Adam Schiff, former National Security Advisor John Bolton, FBI Director Comey, former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, her husband, former President Bill Clinton, another former President Barack Obama, former Attorney General under Obama, CIA Director, Director of National Intelligence, dozens and hundreds of others from the untouchables become the untouchables. And hopefully soon they will become outcasts. I hope they drag down the same kind of creatures and scoundrels with them so it won't be boring to drown. That's all, ladies and gentlemen. Until next time.